Welcome to Curtain Call, the show where we go behind the curtain with the stars of the culture wars. I'm your host, Alexandra Marshall, and today we are joined by Jamie Spry. So, Jamie, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Ellie. Nice to see you here.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Jamie is a culture warrior for the libertarian conservative side of Twitter. He sits there and he tries his best to try and combat the narrative of the climate change cult online. And your work has been greatly appreciated by some of the bigger names there. Your stuff appears on Sky News on a Sunday on Outsiders.
Yeah, well, it was funny. Rowan sort of picked up some of the I guess, skeptical realist chat on Twitter and ran with it. And he does the Ice Age watch episode, which I did feature on a few times, which was I was a bit chuffed by. So, but it was good because it's getting out some of the information that I guess the mainstream media and politicians won't necessarily get out to just, I guess, the general public. So we often get a sanitized version of climate change and hell and brimstone and the world's going to end, but there's a lot of counter evidence out there. And I guess with the climate debate, with a lot of politically charged debates these days, you're not actually getting the other side. I guess there's always two sides to the coin. So there's a good little band of realists out there who is getting some really good science out there and some really good information, which does kind of categorically contradict a lot of the narratives you're getting out there, a lot of the politically driven narratives. So I think it's a good thing that we can,
Well,
get out
Jamie,
there.
I certainly use your work a lot. Basically, I steal it. This is no other way to put that. And many other conservatives in the sphere, they use your brilliant tweets, which often include a lot of graphs and links to external things like the climate blog. How did you get into this? Is this your profession, or is this an obsession and interest? How did you come to being so interested in producing information related to this climate change debate?
I guess it's a bit of all of the above. I mean, how it all began, I guess the whole climate issue came to the fore, to the public's purview out of the 2006 Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And I think that actually took me. I was startled by the information, and until a year later, the British High Court, before I guess the courts are all politicised, back in 2007, they found 9 categorical errors and exaggerations, which were the main 9 points that Gore made. So that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And it was based on exaggeration and fear-mongering. They were kind of the words out of the British High Court judge. So, but the media didn't pick up that at all. So I think that spoilt their catastrophic narrative. So then
When that came out, that video, that whole what was it? In An Inconvenient Truth, it was all about the world ending. I can't remember if it was ending in an ice age at that point, or if they'd switched to global warming apocalypse, but it was one of their climate apocalypses. And it was so far beyond the realm of normal that people thought it was basically a joke. And now that's mainstream for the United Nations and our political leaders. Are you shocked at how quickly that outrageous narrative of Al Gore has become the political norm?
Yeah, I am, absolutely, and more so for the profession of science. I think science was bastardized a lot by it in terms of cherry picking information and finding the most hysterical, alarmist information to put out to the public. I guess the intent was whether it was I guess an intention to shock people, which in my eyes, science shouldn't be used for that. The whole scientific method is to have a hypothesis or a theory, which basically anthropogenic global warming or catastrophic anthropogenic global warming is still a theory. There is no proof that the CO2 molecule is causing, catastrophic climate weather events. There actually isn't. There's no scientific paper that has said that. So yeah, I'm really surprised and a bit flattened. And that's when I sort of went out and decided to do my own research and study some of the other stuff. And when you really dive under what you see in the mainstream, it's incredible how how filtered and alarmist the version we get is, which is kind of sad for science because it's kind of ruining the reputation of science, perhaps. So,
yeah, well, you and I share a love of science. I mean, I did engineering. I loved science at school. And the thing that I loved about science was that it's a profession where anybody can start from nothing, read the documentation, replicate the results, and do their own discovery and work. I mean, what people forget about, especially in today's modern age, is that a huge percentage of scientists in history were actually laymen who noticed things and did their own research, and then the establishment and the Royal Society had to acknowledge their work. It's not a community of elite by any stretch of the imagination. It tries to be, but that's not the real story of science. And what we are seeing now is this idea of gatekeeping, where only the experts, and I use experts in inverted commas there, are allowed to have an opinion on science. And that goes against the essential narrative of what science truly is, which is meant to be an open and factual exploration of the truth of our universe. Have you had experiences with this pressure group online who are using expert gatekeeping as a way to stifle debate and to stop people like yourself from having an opinion and from producing evidence to the contrary of their narrative?
Yeah, I guess the mainstream media, they're the ultimate gatekeeper. I guess they're probably more powerful than government right now, because especially as their powers become so much more centralized. I mean, I think Channel 10 is owned by Comcast, and so the daily narrative goes out. So that is, I guess, the ultimate barrier to push through the mainstream media. What they say goes. And politicians tend to follow that line too, because they will get bashed up by the mainstream media if they don't toe the line. So that's the ultimate gatekeeper in my eyes, the mainstream media, and they won't allow any dissent outside of the preferred narrative at all. Anything that contradicts, the preferred wisdom of the day is shot down. And I mean, you're labelled a science denier, which is kind of a belief structure, really. I guess belief and denial are kind of the words of zealots, not scientists. So, yeah, that's what I've noticed. So there's a hard barrier to push through, which is the mainstream media. But yeah.
Well, unfortunately for science, because it is a tool of great power, because knowledge can, of course, topple these systems of power. And in the past, there were different organizations who were trying to control it. So everyone knows the story of the Catholic Church and Galileo having to kneel and recant what he discovered. The church had a big role, particularly in Darwin's era, when we were discovering more about ourselves. And any idea that humans might have evolved was, of course, heresy and against the group consensus. And now we've watched government come through with a similar desire to censor and control the information of science, because they, of course, based a lot of their political careers and their own personal finances on the climate change narrative. It's no joke when you realize there are trillions of dollars caught up in not only green bond activities and renewables companies, but also political careers of politicians who have no desire to walk back a line that they've based their election campaigns on. What sort of role do you think politics and the desire for political leaders to stay in power is stifling debate and truth in this climate change narrative? Certainly, I see you trying to counteract some of these political figures. Do you think it has a big role there that you're struggling with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with anything so emotionally structured, I mean, the whole environmental issue is a very emotional issue. So anyone who dares to kind of contradict the narrative that we're all going to die in 10 years is looked upon as a planet hater, which is the thing. And politicians don't want to be labelled as planet haters. Only the really, the really brazen ones like Craig Kelly, for example, Matt Canavan to a point. But they are very much isolated and demonised for having an objective scientific view. And any science they do pull is looked at as, not proper science, I guess. So there's a lot of things to say about, the terms that politicians have. I mean, they've only got 3 years, so they go on the whole green agenda and tick boxes, and they look fantastic, but they're actually hurting the poor and now more or less the middle class. And there's a really amazing transfer of wealth going on from the middle class and the poor, and in terms of higher electricity bills. And that's where a lot of my drive came from, was to stand up for the people who don't have a voice, I guess, the middle class and the poor, against the elites who are pushing a line. I mean, they can afford all the green taxes. Big corporations can afford carbon taxes. People can't. The average working class person can't. Yet they don't have a voice. Yet we see on certain elections, I mean, even Morrison's election, he was put in 2018 on the back of the fear of Shorten's draconian climate change laws. Yet as soon as Morrison got in, he lurched to the left and tried to appease the ABC and appease the mainstream media, which is obviously of the left now. So he kind of left his quiet Australians, to go. So that really angered me a lot, because he got in on the back of the main bulk of the community not wanting, so many wind farms and solar panels, which just jack the price of their thing up and actually do nothing for the environment or change the weather.
It's funny you should mention Craig Kelly, because in his opening speech to Parliament, which I've just gone through, he pretty much starts off by describing himself as an environmentalist. And most of the Liberal base and Conservative base who tend to vote Nationals are rural, they're farmers, or they are old school environmentalists who really do care about saving water, saving environments, planting trees, keeping pollution low. It was a big mistake for the Liberal Party, I think, to allow the Greens to have the environmental narrative, when really what we're seeing is the Greens being large corporatists who are empowering nations like China and all of the billionaire businessmen surrounding the energy industry, versus the poorer, as you correctly say, the middle class and poorer classes of Australia, who are real environmentalists but are being pushed down by green taxes, which do nothing for the environment. Now, what I've noticed that disturbs Conservatives is, I look at the mountainsides being leveled and forests being cut down to carpet the area in wind turbines, which, as we all know, are short-lived, low energy yield, and the sort of scorched earth approach of solar panels, which do a similar amount of damage on the ground, because solar panel fields, that's it, you've got solar panels, you've got nothing else. And they take an awful lot of space in order to produce a small amount of energy. Conservatives look at this and go, this doesn't seem like a very energy efficient way to save the environment. It's a massive mining disaster. It produces no energy. You have to have a backup system of lithium batteries, which are their own massive environmental problem, all on their own. And then it all goes in landfill within 30 years. So we are, I think you and I come from the same page, where we want the environment, but we are forever listed as anti-environmentalist, when that's not our position at all. Is that something that you find difficult to deal with, this idea that you're anti-environment when you are literally fighting for the environment?
Yeah, I guess it brings a sort of interesting analysis. I mean, the greatest threat to the environment is not affluence, it's poverty. And all that green taxes do is actually make us more impoverished. I mean, there's a great example of the island of Haiti and Dominican Republic. They're split in two. Haiti's pretty much 99% denuded of forest, whereas Dominican Republic, who are use evil fossil fuels, their forests are lush and green. The point is the Haitians use wood and chop down their forests to burn and to keep warm and to keep cool and for industry and housing. On the other side, and you can see it from satellite maps, there's this great line where the border is, and Dominican Republic is lush and green and magnificent, because they use very low, high energy density coal-fired power stations, which take up a tiny land footprint and enable us to save the trees. So, I mean, the whole point of the original green movement back in the Bob Brown days is, save the forest, which is admirable, but I'm not sure the greens are so green anymore. They're perhaps a little shade of red, or perhaps we could call them watermelons. Green on the outside, red on the inside.
The Greens in Germany are complaining because the government there, the Green government, wanting to cut down the Hansel and Gretel forest for biomass fuel, which is basically, they say biomass, and the EU gives it 5 stars for energy efficiency and greenness, but it's basically cutting down old growth forests, putting them in a wood chipper and then burning them.
That's right, yeah.
I find that so difficult to understand how the UN can say, yep, that's green, but how dare you have nuclear power, which is the lowest form of carbon emissions possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think they see the irony. I mean, let's take, say, the Drax plant which is a biomass plant in the UK. They import 12 million tons of wood chip to burn in this biomass thing, plant, basically to replace coal. Now, coal is a stored wood underneath underneath the earth. I mean, trees, you got to chop them down. They're shipped all the way from Canada to be burnt, and UK only grows, I think, 2 million tons worth of trees of a year. So there's a 10 million ton deficit that they're burning. And the reason that they're allowed to do it is because under the EU CO2 rules, biomass isn't factored into the CO2 counting equation. So that's why Germany's happy to chop down their forests, because there's no CO2 imprint on their data at the end of the day. So it's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's
So what you're saying is they're allowed to cut down forests to burn, releasing carbon in order to save forests, but we're not allowed to dig up nuclear energy from our ground for energy efficiency, because that makes total sense.
Yeah, nor are we allowed to use our coal in Australia, the cleanest coal in the world, which is black anthracite. Yet we're allowed to ship it to China so they can use it to make us windmills, send us windmills back, which send us broke. So there's this kind of nasty circle that goes around, which is kind of, it's very hypocritical. It's not cool.
I've said a lot about the geopolitical problems with using renewables in Australia. We are a country that has beautiful gifts as far as energy goes. We have, as you say, coal, we have gas. We've got more than the Earth's entire lifetime supply of nuclear energy. So we don't actually have to go anywhere for energy. But what we've done is we've decided to allow billionaires to import our entire energy grid from the renewables of China, who, for our viewers, they basically own the renewables market because they dig up all the raw materials, because it's a dangerous and destructive activity. They're not rare, they're just dispersed. So we know the problem of obviously giving our energy grid to China is not a good idea when they are the biggest Pacific threat that we have at the moment, and the most likely to cause trouble on the world stage. So that aside, what is in your opinion, the worst of the renewables energies, and why? And if you could just give us a brief overview of what's wrong with the backup grid, this parallel backup battery grid that is not really mentioned enough when we're talking about solar and wind.
Right. Well, I guess we start with Elon's South Australian battery grid. It costs $150 million. It's actually recharged on gas turbines, which you don't hear that in the media. There's a whole bunch of gas turbines that are being put up to firm up South Australia's energy grid. South Australia, by the way, has the highest energy costs in the world. It overtook Germany, I think, 2 years ago. And that's on the back of this massive acceleration in solar and wind, which, I mean, work at the best times. It's got a 30% capacity rate, which, I mean, not capacity, but it works only 30% of the time. Obviously, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and even if it blows too hard, they have to stop them. So they're firming it up with gas, which is obviously a fossil fuel. But the media don't tell you that because they don't want to take away from the pretty little narrative that green energy is the way to go. So I guess back to the Elon thing. If say South Australia wasn't connected to the national grid, because they're getting most of their power from Liddell and Victoria, which are both coal plants, if they clicked out of that grid and had to rely on wind and solar, the Elon Musk battery grid will last 1 minute for 30,000 homes. So I don't think it's very cost effective. in terms of what it's meant to do. I think it's just another form of window dressing to pretend that we can firm up, renewables when it's cloudy, when it doesn't blow, when it's at nighttime. So it just drives the cost of everything up.
Let's be real about renewables. It's often mentioned but never really explained by the mainstream press, this idea of having a parallel power grid. And that means that renewables have to have a baseload power grid sitting underneath them because they fluctuate wildly with their power distribution on a good day. That's just if it's working well. And they have the batteries underneath them to even off their jumping around as far as their power grid, which plays havoc on the lines and the infrastructure. But then also at the end of the day, the power grid underneath them, so the battery backup, can't support them for any significant length of time. So what they have is a backup grid of a nuclear power plant if you're in Europe, or if you're here, a coal grid or a biomass grid or something that produces power in a regular fashion. The thing is, you don't need the renewable side of that grid. All you need to produce is the base power. So we're essentially building ourselves a second unnecessary grid at enormous cost to the planet because of how renewables work. And have you ever heard anybody in the press talk about the fact that we've built a second grid for no reason? Because we can't come off the baseload grid.
No.
Can we? That's it.
No, they don't want to bell the cat. I mean, the obvious thing is, why do you need two forms of energy when one works just as well? I mean, Liddell is pretty much powering, 22 million kilowatts, powering the whole of Australia, really, or keeping the grid stable. I mean, and that's one coal plant, which I think AGL wants to decommission by 2022, or they're putting a threat out there. Basically, they want green subsidies. If the more green energy they put in, the more subsidies they get. They make more money out of green energy through taxpayer subsidies than they do from selling coal. But if we got rid of Liddell, the whole of Australia would come to a grinding halt. So it's really,
That's the thing about
and then you've got
that's the interesting thing about engineering, right? So you can make business money out of these renewable scams, I call them. It's the subsidies that the government provides. You can make a fortune. There's no question that if you manage to hoodwink the government into giving these companies money, great, you will become billionaires. But there's a physical attribute underneath here, which is the actual grid itself. If you continue to deteriorate the baseload energy grid, the lights will go off. And at that point, what are the politicians going to do when they end up with candles as their main source of light? Have you seen any evidence that our politicians are aware that this is the natural end? And do you think it's going to happen to Australia the way things are going?
Of course it will. It's inevitable. The reason they don't complain, I mean, South Australia had those two memorable grid power blackouts, I think, back in 2018 and one in 2016. I think it went around the world. I mean, South Australia was black for 7 minutes, basically because the whole grid blew up. There was a storm and one pylon went down and it was all over. But they had actually no more thermal energy to back up. I think they just got rid of plywood, and but the other, well, in terms of, say, the politicians, where they come in, if you mention that, they're still going to hold that ground. They're not going to say, okay, maybe we should think of nuclear, because the Greens will say, no, nuclear's evil, even though it's CO2 free, and CO2's their boogeyman, but they won't go down nuclear. So the politicians won't dare err on the side of, okay, maybe we need some cheap, reliable energy, like the rest of Asia is doing. Even Germany's doing. They're opening 6 coal-fired power stations at the moment, which the media don't tell you. So what happens is then they...
the power plants again. The French are kicking back the nuclear power plants because they ran out of energy.
Yeah, well, they're running 70% CO2 free nuclear, but you don't hear that from the Greens. I mean, it's just our politicians, what they'll get into is, forms of firming up. We need more batteries or even more windmills. I mean, you wouldn't be able to have there wouldn't be the land to build enough windmills or solar panels to power Australia of any given day. So that's I think they're afraid. They're afraid of the mainstream media and the Greens. They're afraid to come out and say, this is reality. What are we doing? Which is really, really disappointing, because they're meant to, be purveyors of the truth, aren't they? I mean, we put them into government to tell us the truth. So,
well, apparently we did, but that's a really great point you touched on. If we're going to talk about facts, we're going to talk about reality. Let's talk about the reality of an energy nirvana of solar and wind. Do you know roughly how much of our landscape we would have to carpet with solar panels and wind energy and batteries in order to roughly meet this idea of a perfect renewables world.
Yeah, they did a study in England a couple of years ago where they put a nuclear power station, which was sort of so big, and how much wind and solar they'd need. Actually, it was a map of the United States. So pretty much the entire United States was covered with windmills and solar panels versus a tiny dot, say, in Texas for one nuclear power station. So that it's astronomical how much you need to ratchet up the land use to have any sort of hope of having 100% renewable energy in air quotes. And that's just not going to happen. Because the wind still doesn't blow at times, or it blows too heavy, or we have nighttime, which knocks out solar panels. So,
well, the sheer use of those resources is impossible, because to carpet the world in solar panels, even if you wanted to do it, you have to dig that out of the ground. So not only do you destroy the ground you're putting it on, you've actually used your resources. And I know from electronics that we had a massive problem in the end of the 90s when they realized they were going to run out of the basic elements for some of the components of our LCD screens and our really important electronics. And they had this whole drive of please donate your electronics so that we can recycle them. That wasn't because they cared about the planet. That was because they were running out of the raw materials inside. And now they're using that in all the solar panels and wind turbines, meaning that we'll run out of resources for our computers, which we kind of need. So there's no, I find that people don't understand this idea that solar panels, and they are renewable in the idea that you have to keep renewing them because they keep dying. But they're not made of renewable energy. They're made of very real mining, hard equipment. But you've mentioned nuclear, and this is a big topic in Australia because in the general population, there's enormous support for nuclear because we're not idiots. But in the political class, they're frightened of it. So I find that a lot of the Greens I argue with online have no idea that we've had 2 nuclear power plants in Australia. What's your view of fighting against this idea of no nuclear online versus the reality of nuclear power in Australia?
Well, I guess on a more sort of fundamental level, finding out where the Greens are really at, whether they're really environmental protectors or whether they're, pushing for this globalist political venture, which the corporatist elites. And all you really have to do is say to them, isn't CO2 the boogeyman? I mean, that's the whole genesis of this, why I'm talking to you now, the climate change debate, is that the more CO2 we put into the atmosphere, the more the world heats up, which is the theory, but it's actually not happening that way. But and you will say that to them. If CO2 is your boogeyman, why don't you embrace nuclear? It's completely 100% CO2 free, a really small land footprint. You don't have to chop down any trees, but they will then say, no, we hate nuclear. So there's no win-win scenario with them. There's no coming to a happy medium with them, which shows to me that the climate change debate is categorically political and aimed to achieve power. That's it. It's not about the environment at all. That's my opinion from looking at this stuff for the past 14 years.
Yeah, well, not only, my favorite debate from them is, but if you've managed to get them on the environmental saving, it doesn't produce carbon dioxide, which is true. They go, but it's expensive. I'm like, as opposed to the trillions of dollars that you're pouring in to the renewables. And of course, the reason that nuclear is expensive is not because it is an expensive technology. It's because of all the additional taxes and fees that are placed on top of it by the government, which are entirely optional. They don't have to do that. But with nuclear, the reason we should really be discussing it is because nuclear power, as you say, does not produce the CO2 emissions. Even in its production, it's still a fraction of a percentage of lifetime per unit of power produced. But what they say is, but then radiation is dangerous. And the thing that bothers me is radiation isn't actually dangerous to the survival of the planet. So we live in a highly radio intense world to begin with. We're buffeted by radiation from everywhere. We dig it up out of the ground. It's everywhere and it dissipates pretty fast. It's not an existential threat to life or the planet. But they use that as an excuse to stop you from using nuclear energy to replace it. It seems to me like they're frightened that the market for renewables would be ruined if we are allowed to go to nuclear energy, because it solves the problem they set up. Do you think that's at the bottom of the thing, that is what the problem is? Nuclear undermines the enormous money-making scam of the renewables industry itself and puts power back in the hands of countries like Australia to have their own power.
I think it's darker than that. To just be frank, I think they're very much a misanthropic organisation. Misanthropy is the hatred of humanity. They run on the basis of lines of Malthusianism, which, there's too many people on the planet, we're using resources. That might be so, but that doesn't mean you can wield your political magic under the banner of green and destroy people's lives, and the poor, make them poorer, and the middle class rip into their businesses, and only sort of empower the rich elites and the corporate world. I mean, it'll all. I thought socialism was meant to even the scale, or communism, which they espouse to, by the way. But but what it's actually doing, all it's doing is it's widening the gap between rich and poor. We used to have the Occupy Wall Street 1% people, which is kind of a noble thing, but you're actually getting the 1% by pushing green energy, because you're just shoveling a whole lot of money from the wealth transfer from the poor and the middle class to the elite and the rich, and that's not very equitable to me. So Joe Biden's kind of going on about equity and so forth at the moment, which equality, I think everyone wants equality, but this green energy movement is not really creating equity. It's just putting money into the hands of really powerful corporations. So I don't know. That's couldn't be a good thing.
The reason you're on a show about culture warriors, and I brought you on here as a culture warrior and not a scientific show, is because the climate change, I call it a cult, the climate change political movement is a cultural movement. As we have sat here and discussed, if it was a science movement, it would have all been over yesterday, because we have a solution to their problem. Nuclear energy, everyone can go home. No problem. Planet solved, right? We can all leave. Discussion's over. From a technical standpoint, but from a political standpoint and a cultural standpoint, we've started calling climate change eco-fascism, because it has become entangled with a network of socialist organizations like the United Nations, which are led by a group of socialists, and also the more extreme fringe groups, the Antifa-style groups who siphoned off onto Extinction Rebellion. But they're the same people in both groups, so we can quite happily tie those two groups together. And it's become, the environment's become a way of propping up political systems, dismantling capitalism, which, even though capitalism has led to the best environmental practices in the world, and communist countries and socialist countries are by far the worst when looking after the environment, that's what it has become tied up in. So when you fight online, you're often fighting a philosophical and political discussion more than you are fighting a scientific one, which you do every time, by the way. Your posts are great. I encourage everyone to go to your blog and to your Twitter account. I will put the links in the video description. But with that, you've touched on the most important thing, and that is, as people get poorer, they look after the environment less, not because they hate the environment, because poor people don't have the resources to correctly look after the environment, which is why Australia, when it was a rich, wealthy country, we have one of the best environmental records. But if you go into Asia and you go into Africa and South America, where the population have nothing, their environment is a disaster. So do you want to you've got all the data and you know all this. Do you think that a bigger problem than CO2 might be the pollution that is coming out of these communist and socialist countries because of poverty? And do you see that being the real problem going forward, not this apocalyptic change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the interesting aspects. I mean, we hear this word carbon pollution. That's a clever way of conflating visible particulate pollution, which it's not. Carbon dioxide is invisible, tasteless, colourless, inert, and a trace gas. Whereas actual particulate pollution, we all hate that. Industry fumes and so forth. But that's a whole different issue. If we spent the money we're spending per day on climate change policies, which is $400 billion a day globally. That's what the taxpayers forking out for the climate change boondoggle. So, but if we all fixed, particulate pollution, like this 1970s Clean Act in America, which drastically reduced, all your bad toxins, sulfur dioxide and so forth, are coming out. And they put, fly ash traps on coal plants, and that greatly cleaned up the air. And I mean, Australia's got some of the cleanest air in the world because we have very strict particulate measures. Whereas Asia and a lot of places in Africa, they're very poor. They don't have the money to afford particulate things. Now, the reason that I believe we don't actually, or these groups like the UN and all the affiliated green groups, aren't actually interested in fixing real pollution like particulate pollution, is because of this fact. Once we fix all that and clean it all up, I believe that then they've got nowhere to go. They've got no issue anymore. So it's a perpetual problem that they want to keep manifesting. And they say we want to stop climate change. The climate always changes. So it's a wonderful thing. That's why they changed the name from global warming to climate change, because they realized the planet wasn't warming. But if global warming, you could potentially, you can ping it down and perhaps stop it. But climate change always changes. So when it's hot, it's climate change. When it's cold, it's climate change. So it's a null hypothesis, as they'd call it in science. So it's a perpetual, never-ending battle that the taxpayer is fighting against these noble, virtuous green groups, who use the platform for power. That's my ultimate take on it. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about the whole narrative. The only people who are denying climate change are the climate change cultists, who appear to think that we live in a climate-controlled environment that never changes, when even a brief history of human occupation of Earth shows that our oceans have risen and fallen more than 150 meters just in human occupation. Yeah. Forget about the ancient world, which, I mean, we almost, when a lot of people don't realize this, but when cyanobacteria, which is those little stacks of coral reefy style things off the west coast of Australia, they're one of the oldest life forms. And when they first came about in the ocean, they created oxygen for the first time. And that pretty much nearly finished Earth there and then, because it sent us into a snow globe Earth. And if we didn't have salt water, which is heavier, allowing it to remain liquid, that would have been it. That would have been catastrophic climate change almost overnight. But these things, they're not aware of the real history of Earth's climate, yet they think that these couple of degrees fluctuation as we exit out of an ice age, which is what we've been doing, is somehow the end of the world. They look at this much of the graph. They don't then extend the graph back and have a look at the global trends, which, when you're talking about billions of years, is a far more important measure. You can't use human life experience as a measure for the climate. We don't live long enough. It's not. We're ants for the climate. We're not. Yeah, you can
use humans if their hatred of humanity is so great, which does tend to err on those people's lexicon. There's, as I said, misanthropy, Malthusianism, which stretches in. So and as you said, the length of what they take history. I mean, we could throw around history denial if we wanted, but we don't, because we tend to work in facts and reason and sanity. But they actually just pretty much take the chunk from the 1970s, which was tabled by the UN as the global cooling crisis. I think Newsweek, Time magazine, all these scientists, Schneider came out saying, we're going to enter a new ice age. I think the UN actually in 1972 wanted to spread black soot on the Arctic ice cap to attract sunlight to melt it. I mean, that's 40 years ago, Ellie. So in 40 years, we've gone from a global cooling crisis under the banner of climate change, man-made, to now global warming crisis, because it started warming naturally. It's only been 1.5 degree in 150 years, which really isn't that much in the context of things, but that's where we're at. So they take from the 70s and show you a graph like this, and it's like, but what happened before? The 1930s were by far the hottest decade of the 20th century. I mean, you've got the Dust Bowl that happened in America through the 30s, when I think 7 million people evacuated to California, and so they take a very small, piece of the chart and tell you that we're all going to die, which is a lie. Yeah.
And they always exclude 1910 as well, because that was the year of extreme droughts and heat, when my own family were losing all of their cattle and they had to leave their properties because it was a drought that would never end. But spreading ash on the Arctic, I mean, goodness me, don't help, I think, is what we should tell the government. Please don't help at all. Just leave it alone. You're more dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think now, Bill,
they were going to pull some kind of asteroid into our orbit to help measure climates and things. Like, can you please just stop touching stuff? Like, it'd be much better if you didn't help us at all.
I think it comes under the hubris of mankind, isn't it? They're trying to play God all the time. I think Bill Gates now wants to build mirrors in space to deflect the sun. I mean, it's just not. Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah, I'd rather not live in the snow globe. I hate the cold. I need to have like about 30 degrees. I'm happy. I don't want mirrors deflecting the little heat that I have. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I actually wasn't going to ask you this, so this is a question without notice. Apologies for that. I was just remembering when you were talking about these online graphs and things, that I did the legwork and took a figure about the rising sea levels that was being quoted by the IPCC in their report.
Yeah.
And I tracked it down because I noticed that the same figure was quoted in every report. It wasn't like it was a range of reports where people had gone out and done their own research and come back with, collaborating evidence. It was one figure. And I tracked down the origin of the figure, and it was a single report from scattered tidal measurements that were not taken in the same location for any length of time. And then they were homogenized, which is basically changed to look right. And then they've used that, which was proof of nothing, as a measure that the IPCC then used in their reports that, oh my God, they aren't going to sink. Have you noticed that that's the case a lot of the time, where these reports are taking single figures from obscure reports that are not even validated inside their own report, and then magnifying that as an immutable fact of the debate?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a classic case of cherry picking again. I mean, and homogenization. They'll homogenize it to what they want, or the climate models. They'll put in data to make the climate models exceedingly hot. I mean, but who's putting information into the climate models? And I mean, back on sea level, the actual global sea level rise data is, fraught with danger, I guess, because at any given point on the Earth, the continental plates are moving. I mean, there's the sort of rebound from the Ice Age still going on. So if we look at, say, Sweden, the sea level rise is plunging. It's actually falling because I guess when the glaciers, when all the melt happened 20,000 years ago, the plates are still rebounding, so the sea's going down. So, I mean, the IPCC aren't going to show you Swedish tidal graphs, are they? Because it goes in the wrong way. They're only going to pick.
They find out the continents are going up as they crash into each other. They're drifting sideways, and then they're also going that way. And so, while the sea level might go up here, it doesn't mean the whole planet is going to be flooded in any sense of the word.
No, and I mean, if you look at from 1750, there was something happened, which scientists don't actually know what happened, but for about, I think, 5,000 years, there was no sea level rise. And in 1750, there was an uptick to pretty much the same rate as it is now, which is about 1.2 mil a year. And that's not accelerating. The IPCC tried, not the IPCC, actually, they've been quite honest about it. In fairness, but a lot of I think NOAA and NASA came out with a graph showing a slight acceleration. But if you look at other data, there is no acceleration. It's still about 1.2 mil a year. But even that, they will blame on humans. But that's been happening, for 300 years. I mean, the industrial age really only began going after World War II in 1950. What the IPCC would point at their current, what they call, anthropogenic global warming, only from 1950 onwards. So what happened from 1750? I don't know. Barney Rubbles.
I've got a rule. Every time someone mentions NASA, I have to remind the world that they're the geniuses that crashed one of their orbital ships into Mars because they confused feet and meters. So when they can that sorted, I'll believe that they're millimeter changes in the sea level.
Yeah.
Just a few
Well, I think, sorry, just back on that. That was a problem with groupthink, wasn't it? That issue. So the group, no one could come in and say, "Hey guys, I think your data's wrong." And they all said, "Who are you? Shut up." And they had that error, which I don't know, cost the taxpayer again billions of dollars. So this whole groupthink thing lies in it, doesn't it?
Demise for no reason. Poor little thing.
Yeah.
Just getting smashed into Mars.
Yeah,
I have a great affection for the technology on Mars. I feel so sorry for them. Topic. Just a few more things. A lot of people have noticed that the people who look after the land tend to be the people who live in the country. And they also tend to be the climate skeptics because, weirdly, they are used to the way that the climate is quite violent and changes, and that one hailstorm is not the end of planetary life. Droughts are a thing. Farmers know this. Floods follow droughts. Why have we got city activists demonizing farmers and people who live on the land when the city activists have almost no knowledge of what it is to live out in amongst the climate they're attempting to play with? Have you been able to work out what that is?
Well, I'd say from a political point of view, most farming communities are independent people and they probably vote Conservative. That'd be one reason. The second reason, again, is just demonizing certain groups who they feel are probably scarring the land when really they're the ultimate investors in the land and are good to the land and know how to treat their land, know how to fireproof it. But the green groups I think just have a constant attack of anyone who claims to have any ownership of the land. They kind of want to own everything. They want to own your lives. They want to own your taxpayer funds. They want to own your thoughts. They want to own the ideology. They want to own every space. So anyone who falls outside is isolated and demonized. Yeah.
What's your big thing right now? What is your most crucial idea or cause that you are attempting to fight right now that you would like the audience to be aware of?
I guess it's the energy debacle. I mean, we've been told for the last 10 years that green energy would reduce prices, but they keep going up and up and up, which is in direct correlation with the massive proliferation of I call them unreliables. There's no other way to look at it. They can all fossick around for different excuses, and I mean, it's got to end up coming to a crashing halt. Apart from the levels of debt that our country's going into, paying for all this stuff, and the rise of China, who are using our coal to gain a geopolitical advantage. So that's the big thing, I think, energy. And also, I mean, we talked about the land use from wind and solar. I don't think anyone actually realizes, how much mining goes into one solar panel. I mean, there's 4 tons of copper that goes into each windmill. That's a lot of copper. And I remember that older hashtag that was going around years ago by the green groups, keep it in the ground. Hang on a minute, where do you get copper from? So, and each windmill uses 220 tons of coal just to melt the steel. And you've got to back them up with thermal energy, which is either nuclear or reliable hydrocarbons. And so just the mining. So I think you don't sort of hear the counter evidence of what Greens say. Windmills and solar panels, it all sounds wonderful, but what goes into making those things? It's monumental, the amount of industrial process that is needed to do it. And let me tell you, you can't melt steel or aluminium with windmills and solar panels. I mean, find me a windmill solar-powered coking coal plant. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You can't produce enough energy to melt aluminium with a windmill. This is not going to happen. Yeah. So you need a powerful source to do it. So therefore, it goes back to the thing, why bother? Why bother having windmills and solar panels apart from ticking the virtue box? That's the only reason they're here, make people feel good. So it's a travesty. Yeah, so we're just doubling up on energy for nothing.
That's one thing that people don't realize. We keep our renewables, wind and solar creation, and especially the mining of their basic elements in China because of the mining And the mining for wind turbines and solar panels produces radioactive sludge that often just gets put straight back into the rivers of China, where a lot of communities have had to be moved off their land because it's poisoned all the rivers over there. And America did, like, the other thing is that people say, oh, well, the elements are in China, that's why the mining's in China. No, the rare materials for these panels are everywhere. And America in particular used to run a rare earths trade, but it was so toxic that they were forced to close it in order to maintain their green certificates. And that's why China, who doesn't really care about what they do to their own country, are the ones who now produce these wonderful green renewables, environmentally friendly panels, which might look all right when they arrive in Australia, but their birth was hideous for the environment. I've already kept you a long time, and I apologize for that. It's been wonderful, but I've got two more things for you. Do you fear that we are losing the fight, conservatives and libertarians and anybody who actually cares about the environment? Are we losing the fight to politics?
Yes, not in the hearts and minds of the people. I believe there's a large swathe of, individual people, mums and dads, and basic sort of the middle class to the lower class. I think they see these arguments really well. I mean, the evidence is in the 2018 election again, between Shorten and Morrison. I believe it was another climate election, and Morrison won it handily. So we're losing it in the fact that our politicians, once they get in power from, us little people, then they go down the path of virtue and greenness to avoid, I guess, being attacked by the leftist mainstream media, which is in effect a massive roadblock again, because the people are meant to have the say. We vote for these politicians based on what we want. And from all of the evidence I've seen around the world, the majority of people don't want, draconian sort of green taxes put upon them. They just want to have a life, run their business, have low electricity bills, have reliable energy. But it seems our political class just can't come around to the people, which is kind of strange. Like or loathe Donald Trump, I think that was one of the reasons why he was so lauded, was because he actually gave back to the people. I mean, Donald Trump fought laterally and upward against the elites and the establishment. I think most of the people who run us now, they punch down on the people, which is a stark difference. So that's where it is. So there's a big barrier to get through our political class, for sure. Yeah.
Well, the bureaucracy will always fight against any politician who tries to solve the problems that keep the bureaucracy alive. That is a sad fact of our political system as it stands right now. And this is our final question. This is a bit of a fun one, so you can relax. It's not going to be tricky.
Okay.
If you could have anybody to dinner in history, alive or dead, to have a chat with over dinner, who would it be and why?
Can I have two?
Yeah, you can have Donald. I've allowed that before.
I'd probably have, at this political stage, I'd have Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi perhaps, and just watch them get it on.
No, I said to have a chat, not to create a war, which is what you would do.
Yeah, yeah,
that's absolutely a murder that will be solved later on.
I don't know. So yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay, what would you ask Donald Trump and what would you ask Pelosi if you could actually talk to them in person?
Oh, geez, now you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, this is the fun part.
Okay. I'd ask Donald Trump, why didn't you pardon Julian Assange on your way out? And are aliens real?
Yes, that's all I want to know. I don't care about all the rest of politics. Can you just clear up the whole intelligence? That'd be brilliant. Yeah. Well done. That's great. And also, I'd like to thank you particularly for all the work you do, because I know that the conservatives online, they love you. They think you're wonderful. We all steal your work. We copy your work. We repost it. And you've been an enormous help as far as trying to counteract the climate change narrative with real information, with solid facts, and you produce a huge amount of work. So thank you very much, Jamie, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ellie. Yeah, take care.
Thank you for joining us on Curtain Call.
We are hosted by The Good Source, the home of conservative and libertarian voices. Help us fight fake news by following us online. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all good podcasting services. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe.